So the Iran war is reaching a critical phase. President Trump just drew a red line with the Iranian regime. Open the strait, or we start taking out your power grid. And Iran has less than 2 days to accept, or massive, widespread destruction across the Middle East is set to ensue. And with that, an increasing likelihood of an even longer and bloodier war. Now, in terms of how we got here, it's pretty straightforward. We began the war in Iran, and Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It is still closed, and we're kind of getting to the point where Iran either needs to open it voluntarily or we're going to have to do it by force. This seems to be President Trump trying to push through a solution before we get into trying to open it with military means. Now, Iran here on the northern portion of the map, we've got the Strait of Hormuz connecting. It's this narrow stretch, right? And it connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. Like if you want to get anything out of the Persian Gulf, notably oil, natural gas, and fertilizer via ship, it has to come through the strait. Now, this is a strategic checkpoint. Anytime we've ever considered a conflict with Iran, we have had to plan for the possibility that Iran might mine that strait or shut it down. They've done that, probably not with mines, that's not entirely clear, but with drones. And effectively, the strait has been completely closed for a few weeks now. Iranian ships are still getting through, and Iranian allied ships are still getting through, reaching arrangements with the Iranian regime. This is adding pressure. The impact on the global economy forces countries around the world to pressure the United States and Israel to wrap up this conflict ASAP. That is why the Strait of Hormuz and the ability to close it has a strategic significance in this conflict. And to that end, yesterday, President Trump issued a statement, a threat, really, quote, "If Iran does not fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first." Now, a note on the timing there, because President Trump was very specific, 48 hours from this exact point in time. That exact point in time was 7:44 p.m. Eastern, Saturday, March 21st. So 48 hours after that, that deadline would be 7:44 p.m. Eastern, Monday, tomorrow, March 23rd. We'll keep an eye. It's another red line that's been thrown out there, and that's a risky maneuver whenever you do that. If Iran calls the bluff, are we actually going to carry through with striking the energy infrastructure? Because this really spreads fast. Now, to give you an idea, the largest power plant, to my knowledge, in Iran that President Trump is talking about here is just southwest of Tehran. This is the Damavand Combined Cycle Power Plant. So if he says we're going after the biggest one first, this is the one on the screen here that you would expect to go boom in about 36 hours from now. This gets into very tricky waters, to be blunt. If we just take out all of the Iranian energy infrastructure that is targeting the civilian population, that is a war crime. It's what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And we've condemned that. We've spoken out against that. That is the wrong move. Targeting the civilian population there's no place for that when the United States or any of our allies are waging war. That's what countries like Iran do with their cluster munitions firing into Israel. That's what Russia does when they're firing into power plants throughout Ukraine. Now, there is a line here. Simply going after energy infrastructure is not in of itself a war crime. There's an aspect of proportionality. So if we go after specific power plants that are, say, providing electricity to a missile manufacturing facility, or say the IRGC headquarters, and we're able to take a military objective offline, that is feasible. But if we just remove, again, to take it to the extreme, all of the energy infrastructure in Iran, that would be tantamount to a war crime, because it is targeting the entirety of the civilian population. So we'll see which direction this goes, but as expected, there's already been quite a bit of public pushback saying, wait a minute, do you know what you just threatened? There's no indication from what I have been able to tell that this specific power plant, the Damavand Combined Center, is entirely linked to military mechanisms. So there's a large part of that is keeping the power on in Tehran and surrounding areas that, of course, is made up mostly of civilians. This could get pretty tricky fast. And it's not just what the United States does here, but it's the response as well. So the Iranian regime has already put out a note following this threat. The Speaker of the Iranian parliament said immediately after power stations and infrastructure in Iran are attacked, critical infrastructure and energy and oil infrastructure throughout the region will be considered legitimate targets and will be irreversibly destroyed. Oil prices will be higher for a long time. Now, something we're going to talk about in today's video is the means and the desire to carry out some of these attacks. So is it an empty threat And then does Iran actually want to carry this out? And to that end, we have an assessment here from Dennis Citrowicz, apologies in the pronunciation there, from the Atlantic Council, who said, quote, Iran will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That's not going to happen. In the coming days, we can expect Tehran to threaten to set the Gulf on fire, especially if the U.S. strikes critical infrastructure. Check. That already happened. So, I mean, he put this assessment out, and like an hour later, Iran was saying, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. He said at the same time, such a strike would likely accelerate the Houthis' entry into the conflict. You know what? Let's go back to the map here real quick, because this is one, it's been interesting at this point that the Houthis have not stepped in, but this would be, I mean, talk about spiraling out of control. Again, big picture on the map here. We've got the Persian Gulf in the middle of the screen. Iran has effectively shut this down through closing the Strait of Hormuz. The other access point here that's viable is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So if you go across Saudi Arabia and across Yemen, you end up down here. And again, you can see a very narrow passageway. This is the area that the Houthis have at times pretty well shut down. They have not entered this conflict. If they choose to do so, all of a sudden, you've got these, get in a little further here, you've got these major checkpoints completely sealed off. And again, as we've seen with Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, it does not take continual nonstop bombardment of the strait. It takes the threat, could do real damage, and then just one munition, unmanned surface vessel, missile, or drone flying by, not necessarily even impacting a commercial vessel, and all of a sudden we've got two major choke points in the Middle East are closed off. So Dennis's concern here is if the United States goes after Iranian energy infrastructure, the Houthis are set to enter the conflict, and that would just add even more headaches, to say the least. He says such rhetoric will not shift Iran's position. Instead, it forces the president to choose, talking about President Trump, escalate and follow through, risking broader war, or back down and further erode U.S. deterrence. This is, I have never advocated for red lines, and we've seen a couple of these already in this conflict. It just boxes us in. And there's no indication that Iran is going to open the strait in the next 48 hours. This is kind of their one lever of strategic importance that they have. They cannot stand toe-to-toe with the U.S. or Israeli military. They have such an advantage with the strait. It's hard to imagine that sometime in the next 36 hours they're going to reverse course and say, you know what, actually, let's just get back to talks, because that didn't go well for them the last few times. Dennis wraps up by saying, quote, if the United States wants the strait reopened, it will have to either use force or pursue regime change. There is no third option. Now, again, looking at the means and desire of Iran being able to carry out these strikes, we know that they have the desire to go after energy and oil infrastructure across the region because they've already done that. They've now threatened again that if we go after their energy infrastructure, they will return the favor. So we have to put a check in that box of desire. Means they continue to show the ability to effectively strike targets throughout the region. And as we mentioned in previous videos, they do continue in most cases to go after soft targets. That is the Iranian strategy. They're not trying to eliminate the U.S. military in the region. They're trying to make this too cost prohibitive for the United States to continue. It's going after energy infrastructure, going after civilian locations, getting the pressure increased on the United States from our allies throughout the Gulf. Just yesterday, to this end, we saw a significant Iranian strike in Israel. The BBC said more than 160 people have been injured, some seriously, in Iranian missile strikes on two southern Israeli towns close to a nuclear facility, Israeli emergency officials say. And we have some footage that I'll play here showing the aftermath of these impacts. It was massive, direct impact from this missile. They say Iranian state TV earlier said the strikes were in response to an attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility on Saturday. Israeli correspondent Manny Fabian said the missiles that hit Dimona and Arad carried conventional warheads with hundreds of kilograms of explosives. Air defenses had engaged both projectiles, but the interceptors failed to knock them down. Again, munitions do get through. It happens. Air defense is never 100%. Iran is saying that there's more to this than just a few interceptors missing. The Speaker of the Iranian parliament said, quote, if the Israeli regime is unable to intercept the missiles in the highly secured areas of Dimona, then operationally this is a sign of entering a new phase of the fighting. The skies of Israel are unprotected. As a result, it seems that the time has come to implement the following plans that were prepared in advance. I would take that with a grain of salt. We're prone to exaggerate in all of these regards. One missile getting through or two missiles getting through is not all of a sudden an indication that Israel has no more interceptors. Same as when munitions get through in some of the Gulf states. Sometimes interceptors just miss. But it is notable that a relatively secure area, more than just a random portion of the country, two missiles get through in quick succession. It would not be surprising if Iran tries to seize upon this opportunity. We see continued strikes in that or other sensitive areas in the coming days. And we also saw just yesterday Iran carry out their longest range strike so far. They went after the Diego Garcia airfield, joint U.S.-UK military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. According to the Wall Street Journal, they fired two intermediate-range ballistic missiles. They say, according to U.S. officials, neither of the missiles hit the base, but the move marked Iran's first operational use of IRBMs and a significant attempt to reach far beyond the Middle East and threaten U.S. interests. I'm going to put up a graphic here that I saw circulating showing the estimated range of this munition, and there's a couple different theories as to what this exactly entails, but either way, if Iran is able to go after Diego Garcia, where the United States has long based strike aircraft out of when looking at carrying out attacks inside of Iran. And one of the reasons for that is it's outside the range of Iranian missiles and drones. If it's inside the range, that means that just about every U.S. military facility that we either fully operate or kind of some of these more recent ones that we're kind of piggybacking on, say, U.K. bases, those are all within range as well. The Wall Street Journal says one of the missiles failed in flight and a U.S. warship fired an SM-3 interceptor at the other. According to two of the people, it could not be determined if the interception was made. Iran's targeting of Diego Garcia, around 2,500 miles from Iran, implies its missiles have a greater range than Tehran has previously acknowledged. And this is something we'll have to keep an eye on in the coming days because there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Iran had a self-imposed kind of in good faith was kind of what they were trying to go about, range limit on their missiles. But if you reduce the payload on a missile, it's physics, it generally increases the range of that weapon system. So it doesn't mean that they went into or they had some secret production that they were always sitting on these long-range munitions per se. There are a handful of different ways that they could relatively quickly modify something they have on hand to engage targets at a little further distance. So we'll come back to that and see exactly, should have more information on that here in the coming days. So with Iran lashing out and striking more targets, now threatening to, again, set the entire Middle East on fire, we have to look back at the option for the use of force. And we're seeing more indications that this might be in the cards in an attempt to open the Strait of Hormuz, specifically the idea of seizing Harg Island. And I'll zoom in here to show you. This one, we've talked about it in the past. I don't know that this is the thing that is going to open the strait. If you could snap your fingers and take this island, it doesn't necessarily open the Strait of Hormuz. And the reason I say that is zooming into the map here, this is the strait. This is the challenging portion for commercial ships getting through. Harg Island is not like one of these sitting here overwatching the strait. It's all the way up here in the northern portion of the Persian Gulf. So the effect here would be to, assuming that this is what people are looking at, is to effectively shut down all Iranian oil exports. That could be done, for the most part, by taking Harg Island, where a lot of those are filtered through, but that doesn't really change the dynamic of the opening of the actual strait all the way down here. So to that end, we are seeing a number of additional U.S. deployments heading to the Middle East. The Wall Street Journal just reported that roughly 2,500 Marines from the California-based USS Boxer Amphibious Ready Group and 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit are heading to U.S. Central Command. This is in addition to last week when the U.S. announced that 5,000 Marines and sailors from the USS Tripoli and 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit were heading to the Middle East from the Asia theater, from the Pacific theater. Now, in terms of their arrival, the Tripoli should be there soon, sometime as early as, the next 5 to 7 days, potentially, is when the Tripoli could arrive in region. The Boxer just departed San Diego on the 18th, so they're expected to arrive in theater sometime around mid to late April. Neither one of those on their own, even combined, would be enough to mount a significant amphibious operation that is designed to hold territory for the long term. But we are seeing, along with the threats, and we're more and more talk about the U.S. needing to carry out ground operations to secure the strait, we do seem to have the continued buildup of U.S. forces in the region that would be boots on the ground. So we've got 40 to 50,000 troops across the Middle East already. The vast majority of those are naval personnel and people supporting the air power dynamic of this fight. There's not a lot of ground troops, right? Now we have ground troops moving into the region, albeit relatively low numbers. Now, in terms of the taking of Harg Island, we've actually got a bit of an Iranian response here. This is published in Tasnim Media, so an Iranian news outlet, where they quoted a military source saying around the U.S. threats to Harg Island, quote, "If the U.S. carries out its threats regarding a military aggression on Harg Island, it will definitely face a response that is unprecedented compared to the surprises of the last 21 days of war. If the Americans attack the island, firstly, oil production would be temporarily disrupted. Secondly, Iran would set fire to all of the facilities in the region, and the situation would become much more complicated for the Americans in the region. Thirdly, the Americans would have no way to protect Harg and would suffer losses that are unprecedented since World War II." So, I feel like we blinked, and there's a bunch of different ways this is looking to escalate pretty quickly. I think we have to take the Iranians at their word that they're going to set fire to the Middle East, because they have already started to do that. The shutting down of the Strait was bordering on economic suicide, and they did that right away. Then they started going after their Gulf neighbors, the oil facilities in the region, very quickly. The idea that they wouldn't expand that, I think, would be foolish. So in all likelihood, if the United States hits that energy infrastructure, my prediction is that it does not open the Strait. Iran does not make that determination, but they do follow through with the strikes across the region. This is a very asymmetric fight. All right, it takes very little for Iran to increase the cost being borne by the United States, Israel, our Gulf partners, and then indirectly the rest of the world. They don't have to sink every ship. They don't have to destroy every oil facility. They don't have to shut down every export, every ship moving through the region. They just have to depress that a little bit, and it has a major economic impact around the world. That's what I would expect to see continue. Now, with President Trump laying out this red line, we'll see what happens. It doesn't look like we've got a lot of allied support for opening up the Strait. It sounds like a handful have committed to doing so after the fighting has stopped, like protecting it in the future. That's not really a problem right now. The problem is that it needs to be opened while the fighting is ongoing. That appears to be through the use of military force. I don't think we're going to be able to bomb Iran to open the Strait. It's going to require not necessarily boots on the ground, although if we really actually want to secure this thing for the medium to long term, that's what it would require. But significant naval and air assets over this 24/7, monitoring that location with a lot of ability to intercept any Iranian drones, missiles, or unmanned surface vessels. Even then, maybe. A lot hinges on these shipping companies and the insurance companies willing to take that risk of actually moving these vessels through the Strait. But either way, as expected, before this conflict even kicked off, the critical strategic factor right now in play is the Strait of Hormuz. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.